Hello, I'm Martin Männil, Chief Digital Officer of the City of Tallinn, and I will give you a short overview of what and how we have done in the City of Tallinn during the last 25 years. Tallinn is a capital of Estonia, located in the northern Europe. We have less than 500,000 inhabitants. We generate about 2/3 of the Estonia's GDP. Our financial position is strong, and we're doing okay. We have been recognized during the last couple of years for many awards, and mainly because of our success in providing e-services for our citizens. The e-services can be very, very different. This can be, for example, planning register for detailed planning processes and etc. This can be dashboards for city management. This can be open data. This can be parking solutions, 3D model, or inner legal acts management systems. So very different, but all developed based on the same development principles. I will go through most important of the development principles. First of all, whenever we start to digitalize a process, we start from the service design. We strongly believe that well-designed processes take less effort to implement, and this is really our strong belief that we should start from designing the processes, not just digitalizing the processes. The second part is the solid legal groundwork. Whenever we start creating new information system, we must register it in nationwide information system catalog called RIHA. There we must explain what services are we trying to provide with this information system, who is responsible for it, who are the clients, what kind of data are we planning to process, what kind of interfaces are we building, APIs, and many more information. We also have to provide, we also have to assure that our information systems are compliant with ISO 20001 security standard, and also we must be compliant with European Union-wide data protection regulation, GDPR. When all these things are in place, then we can actually start developing information systems. One of our nationwide main principles is that all the data can be collected only once from the citizens, and it must be stored in the system of the owner of the data. And of course, the data is required in many different information systems. And for that, we have a nationwide data exchange layer called X-Road, which is basically a secure API layer to provide information from one information system to another. The most popular e-services that are provided via X-Road are, for example, from population register, from land register, from business register. We also have a nationwide ID card-based digital identity and digital signature. Digital identity allows us to authenticate ourselves to whichever state-owned or even private-owned information system, and it's one of the very important cornerstones for providing e-services in Estonia. And the other thing I mentioned already, the digital signature is legally binding signature. We can sign documents and send these to court, for example. This means that we can create documents, legal documents, inside the information systems. We don't have to print them out at any phase. We can documents can be in electronic format during the whole life cycle. And these two, the X-Road and the identity with a digital signature, are probably the most important things in our ecosystem, which everything is based on. Of course, there are more things. We have many of our e-services are using some kind of GIS component, maps, 3D models. We are providing these centrally for the whole city. Whenever open data is created, we must provide it for the public, for the citizens, for the companies. We have open data portal, and we open the data by design for everyone who needs it. We also have common visual design elements which make our information systems look a bit similar to each other. They are easier to use for citizens, and they are easier to develop for our developers. We have a nationwide data tracker, which means that every citizen can, at whatever time, check if their data is used by some agency or official, and why. And also we have a personal data tracker in manager. We have also a personal data manager which is under the development, which gives even more control over the data for the citizens. Now a few words about our data-driven solutions. One example is dashboards. We have many of them. This one is for public. It collects. It has very different technical components behind it. Some of these are our workflow management systems. There are our 3D model. There is our statistics catalog, our budget data, etc., etc. And there's an example about our social transport information system, which via X-Road gets data from 5 different nationwide information systems. Of course, nowadays IoT is a big part of the data process. We collect data from thousands of different sensors. We store it in our central data lake. We must grant that the data is well protected and shown on dashboards for the decision makers and also for the public. Our central GIS component is used in most of our information systems. It's provided by our GIS department, and it's common platform of spatial data for everyone. We create a lot of specific dashboards for specific use. This concrete example is for personnel management data, which is used by city managers like myself. This example is for accessibility information system, which is used mostly by disabled people. It uses the workflow management system. Behind it is a map component, and it uses data about the buildings and also the real-time data from different information systems, like for example about the closed roads, etc., etc. Like I mentioned, we also have an open data portal, and we have to provide all the data as an open data whenever possible. Of course, it's not always possible. It's sometimes connected with the business secrets. It's in many cases the data that local government processes is protected by personal data protection regulations. So, but still, there's a lot of data we can provide as an open data. Most popular data sets are transport data and map data. For example, navigation app Waze is using the data about the road closures and construction works in the city of Tallinn. And the data tracker. For quite a long time, we have had the possibility to check who is using our data and what for. And we can always ask, why is our data used? Is it city official? Is it someone from tax board? They always have to have legal reason to check your data. But we are expanding the capabilities of this system. And in the future, everyone will be able to share their data with third parties. And of course, if it's only temporary, then it's temporary. There will be an option to opt out. I think it will give the data we have much more value. It helps to protect people's health and other topics. Well, thank you. That was my short presentation about what we have done in the city of Tallinn regarding the data and how we have done it. Thank you so much. Bye.
Hello, my name's Shane Marshall and I work for the Customer and Digital Group in the Queensland Government. I'd like to start by acknowledging that the land that I live and work on is the traditional country and homelands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples of Meanjin, Brisbane. We acknowledge that they have walked, cared for, sung, told stories and danced on this land for thousands of years. We acknowledge and respect their spiritual relationship, cultural heritage, beliefs and connection to this land, and acknowledge that those connections are still important today. I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. To set the context for privacy in Australia, I'd like to start by noting that we have privacy regimes at both the Commonwealth and state levels. Firstly, at a national level, the Commonwealth Privacy Act was introduced in 1988 to promote and protect the privacy of individuals and also to regulate how Australian government agencies and organisations across the country handle personal information. The Commonwealth Privacy Act and the 13 Australian privacy principles apply to organisations with an annual turnover of more than $3 million, to some other organisations such as body corporates, and most Australian government agencies. This Commonwealth legislation is regulated by the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, and a review of the Privacy Act was announced in 2019 and is currently underway. In contrast, privacy in the state of Queensland, however, falls under Queensland's Information Privacy Act and is regulated by the Office of the Information Commissioner and the Queensland Privacy Commissioner. Now, the Information Privacy Act governs how Queensland government agencies collect, store, use and disclose personal information. Importantly, the Queensland Privacy Act doesn't apply to non-government organisations in Queensland, just Queensland government agencies. The Commonwealth Privacy Act, however, does apply to those other organisations in Queensland, as it does in other states and territories. So in terms of the Australian privacy principles, these are the 13 privacy principles. And as I've mentioned, they apply to most Australian government agencies and some private sector organisations. There are a number of principles that provide choices for citizens in how data about them is used. For example, APP2 requires entities that are in scope for the Privacy Act to give individuals the option of not identifying themselves or using a pseudonym. APP6 outlines the circumstances in which an entity may use or disclose personal information that it holds. And importantly, APP8 is the principle about cross-border information flows and data sovereignty. And this requires protection of personal information before it's disclosed overseas. In 2017, the Australian Productivity Commission recommended that the Australian government introduce a consumer data right to improve consumers' control over the data in which businesses hold about their use of products and services. As an opt-in service, Australians have a choice to use the service or not. Data use by providers requires explicit consent from the citizen. The consumer data right is regulated by two organisations, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission and the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, who I referred to earlier as the regulator for the Australian Privacy Act. So what does the CDR do? Well, the primary focus of the CDR is to provide choice for citizens and make it easier for them to compare products and services and get a better deal. It also helps by reducing the number of times that citizens need to provide the same information to organisations that are accredited under the scheme. Because the CDR is focused on control and choice, there are a range of rules in place to protect citizens' rights. A key measure of the CDR provides transparency so that citizens can easily see and manage where consent has been provided. And this consent can also be withdrawn at any time, and there's an obligation on any providers that were receiving data to stop using it and delete or de-identify any data that they hold. Under the consumer data right, there's rigorous consent requirements in place. If a provider is accredited under the scheme, they need to make it clear for citizens what data is being collected and for what purpose, and who will have access to it and for how long. And then, as previously highlighted, how citizens can manage or withdraw that consent. And all of this happens within the provider's website or app. So I've mentioned providers a few times. Who are they? Well, the rollout of the consumer data right is a staged process managed by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. The first providers it applied to were in the banking sector, and this commenced in July last year. This means for Australians, we can choose to share our existing banking data, for example, transaction history, interest rate, and account balances, with a prospective bank or an accredited finance app or website. The consumer data right will be introduced in the energy sector next, and this will allow Australians to transfer data from an existing energy provider to a prospective provider or to a comparison website for an accurate quote. In summary, the consumer data right has been introduced in Australia to help people make the most of their data. In addition to the Privacy Act and the consumer data right, a range of other nationwide approaches, such as the hosting certification framework, are in place to support the secure management of government systems and data. This particular framework is targeted at government supplier arrangements and is based on the level of assurance that they can provide to government. It places strict requirements and potential penalties on direct and indirect hosting service providers storing sensitive and whole of government data. The hosting certification framework aims to reduce risk, drive efficiencies and cost effectiveness, and importantly, provide certainty for industry and agencies. Shifting now to data sovereignty in Queensland, as distinct from the whole of the country. The Information Privacy Act of 2009 in Queensland applies to Queensland government agencies and provides rules for what agencies must do and what they are permitted to do with personal information, and it also provides rights for citizens in relation to the protection of this information. Individuals can make complaints to the agency in the first instance if they believe that the privacy obligations haven't been met. And if they're not satisfied with the outcome, they can complain to the Information Commissioner as well. In a similar way to the Australian privacy principles, there are privacy principles under the Privacy Act in Queensland. For example, IPP1 relates to the collection and the need for a lawful purpose for the collection of personal information in line with the function of the agency. Jumping to IPP4, this is focused on storage and security of personal information, and this principle places obligations on government agencies to ensure certain protections are in place. There are also a series of principles related to access and amendment, and then more principles on use and disclosure. These relate back to the purpose for which the information was collected and place limits on disclosure. Moving from privacy legislation now to the Queensland Government's approach to data centres and security. There's currently a mix of both state-owned and commercial data providers used by the Queensland Government. This includes significant use of cloud infrastructure, with most of those cloud services consumed from providers located in Australia, which is the preference where possible. However, international hosting is used in some cases. These decisions are often driven by latency and performance, the legal protections afforded by hosting on Australian shores, and the efficiencies of contracting local service providers. In relation to data and information security, the Queensland Government has developed the Information Security Classification Framework. And this essentially requires agencies to determine the business impact level and associated risks for an information asset. We refer to an information asset as a collection of data, which are often associated with a piece of software or a business system. The dimensions of business impact are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I mentioned previously that some international or off-Australian shore hosting is utilised. For this to occur, information that has been classified as having a high business impact must have undertaken a risk assessment related to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability impacts, and the officer, often a departmental head, has accepted this risk assessment. To give you an example, I thought I'd share what this assessment looks like. So I've copied a few of the questions that form the business impact risk assessment. These particular ones cover risks to individual safety, data quality, and distress to a third party. As I mentioned, these are just an example of 3 of the questions, but there are 37 questions in total. These are then considered holistically to provide an overall rating for integrity, availability, and confidentiality, and used to inform the risk assessment. Hopefully that's provided you with some useful information on the data privacy landscape in Australia, both at our national level and within the state of Queensland, and our approach to data sovereignty. Thanks for listening, and I wish you well.
A very good afternoon to all of you. My name is Malte Bayer-Katzenberger. I work as a team leader and policy developer at the European Commission. For those who do not know the European environment so well, the European Commission is a body that has the competence to propose legislation that will apply in the entire European Union. It is also a body that develops technical expertise and supports research and innovation projects. It can be very much aligned to a national ministry, just that at European level, it is encompassing all the countries, all the 27 countries of the European Union. And I'm delighted to speak here today because I have been following the Mydeitor movement that was created in Finland, but with an international reach from the very start many, many years ago, and I was part of the inception phase. And I am also trying to translate some of the ideas and thoughts of the Mydeitor movement into European policy and legislation. And today I will give you at this conference, at this webinar, a quick overview on what the European legislator and innovation funder does in the context of Mydeitor under this mandate. The European Commission is a collegial body, very much like the Federal Trade Commission in the United States, that is composed of a college of commissioners. It's one commissioner nominated by every European country. And here on my second slide, you see the 2 important phases that play a role in the field of digital. You may have heard of the competition commissioner, Margrethe Vestager. She's sometimes in the Financial Times when it goes about finding large companies or also deciding on mergers, acquisitions, on cartels, and about the abuse of a dominant position. She's also coordinating a vice president in the European Commission for all matters digital. And if I can say, she takes a view on this matter here of our interest today that individuals should be very much in capacity to decide on what happens to the data. They should be empowered, and the empowerment word will come back in my presentation, as you see. Next, you see the Commissioner for the Internal Market, Thierry Breton, who is very much also driven to take data sovereignty to industry, and say also industries that generate a lot of data, industries that use maybe Internet of Things applications and cloud should still be in control of the data that are generated with the objects, the IoT objects that they use, or with the data they may store in a large cloud of a large provider. So he's very much saying all European companies need to really benefit from the data that they generate. We have a new wave of industrial data, which is maybe from an economic perspective equally important as the personal data, which is maybe more in the focus of the Mydeater movement. But still, we need to work on making the most of these data, and that by no means seeing the giants of today, the economic value generation of tomorrow will be in the hands of the same. And that's maybe the current background. The college is always nominated for 5 years, so we are in a period from 2019 to 2024, and we're now at the first flying altitude for the new college in terms of the policy development, the legislative proposals. Both are also responsible for the proposals on artificial intelligence, for example, but also on digital identity, which is maybe only something I can speak very briefly on today in this talk. Going to the subject of data, you have a policy statement, a collectively adopted policy statement by the College of Commissioners from February of 2020. It's the so-called EU data strategy, and there's many things that we cover here. That Europe wants to become a data agile continent, that we have to make use of this new wave of data, but also we have to reinforce the position of the individual, and that this would be good for the economy, that there would be more uses of the data and more data-driven innovation in terms of products and services. But this should also be good for society, that there are societal goals that can be only achieved collectively, either with the help of government or by altruistic organizations, foundations, or civil society, and that they all need data, and that we shouldn't see certainly data only as a subject for economic gains. But that's probably also where maybe most of the attention lies. So here you have maybe the following top level 4 messages. I mean, on the consumer side, Europe has a strong tradition of data protection laws. The most important one being the general data protection regulation. And this comes very much from the still technological situation of the 70s, 60s, 80s, where only large firms, in 1990s, where only large firms could basically process personal data. The computing was simply not available to just anyone. That has certainly changed. The access to the tools that make use of data has changed. We all carry smartphones today, and we can basically now, we all use Dropboxes for cloud storage, and we've put our photos in Flickr or wherever else, so that we all have now access to the technologies to really also process basically our own data and take our own decisions, so that we say the rights that we defined from a different minded are very much relevant still today. But we should certainly turn the individual from, let's say, a passive agent or a passive participant in the data economy to a much more active agent. He or she can now take informed decisions where the data should go, and maybe even take the technological decisions. I mean, many of the applications that we will see later here today demonstrate that it's possible to take the data in your own hands, very much literally, and that we can use also some of the innovations of the general data protection regulation for that purpose. First and foremost, that's I think also very widely debated, the right to personal data portability, which is in Article 20 GDPR. But as the Mydeater movement in the white papers back from 2014 have said, it's all very fine to have legal rights. You have the capacity to give or withdraw consent. to ask for data access, rectification of the data portability. But if you don't have the easy-to-use tools, only very few people will do it. Maybe most notably on the European scale, that would be Max Schrems, the civil society activist that has taken Facebook to court, but he also needs a large organization behind him to do so. So if we all have the tools at our disposal at the moment, that would be very, very beneficial. And the second thing that we look at is that the consumer IoT now poses a new opportunity or challenge. Many more things that we use as consumers will be connected to the Internet of Things. And that's more data generated, much more data, much more also revealing data about our personal lives. But it may also mean more lock-ins, that we are tied to agreements that the vendors of these objects take to tell us what services to use and where our data should go, that they may do this behind our back. There will be long agreements. We have no idea what they will sell it to, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So the notion that we use for Mydei터 operators is the notion of personal data spaces. As you know, many terms are used around personal data stores, information banks in certain jurisdictions. And we have now another term. That should mean, and there's no meaning intended to mean anything different. These are novel intermediaries, and if they are truly becoming powerful, I mean, if all of us would store a data with such a personal data space, not only the personal data space would have a lot of data about us, it would also have a lot of information on how we connect to other people. So the metadata about how we interplay with other people, who we give our data to, how often, how regularly, what is our social graph, so to say, around our data, which is ultimately also what makes a lot of big tech platforms rich. So there is, if we want now to move to a Mydei터 system, I think we have to be quite mindful that the nice Mydei터 operators that we see emerging in terms of the startups in Europe, in the US and elsewhere, are maybe very desirable, but we also were, as European policymakers, mindful of the risk that also more integrated firms would offer this, and then all the doubts happen. How safe is Mydei터 with that personal data space provider? What will he or she do with it? So when I now come in a second, the next slide, to the presentation of the regulation, you already see we will address some of these challenges. And then something that we also are quite interested in, as I said in the beginning, we also want to empower basically socially desirable users that have no economic maybe incentives behind them. So data for good initiatives, people should be able to donate their data for research or other public purposes. And that would be then what we could call data altruism. Now, in my next slide, I basically give you a quick outline on the proposal for a Data Governance Act. As I said in the beginning of this presentation, the European Commission has the power to propose laws for the European Union, and the Data Governance Act is such a proposal. It then is a proposal which is discussed in the European legislature, which is composed of the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers, so a representation, if you want, of the peoples of Europe, but also a representation of the member states of the European Union, so a dual chamber system. And that's what we're currently having. So the proposal, of which you see maybe a quick link on the bottom of the slide, which dates from November 2020, is now being discussed in both parts of this European legislature. And it proposes to regulate data intermediaries as a novel function in the data economy. It proposes to regulate them across beyond the Mydei터 operators, which are focusing maybe the consumers very much here. It basically says that there may be many situations where also companies would benefit from an intermediary to do data transactions. If you want to do some further research on this, I would invite you also to look at the work on data institutions by the UK Open Data Institute. There is a lot of research ongoing in terms of what are the type of actors that make data flow in the economy. And we now look at a specific set of these data institutions or data actors as data intermediaries, which are those who help those that have data, which may be individuals or companies, to find users for the data. So the Mydeater operators are certainly in scope. So all the personal data stores that you find where you can store your data and then have apps coming to your data, or you even transfer the actual data to third parties, that's covered. But what is also covered is like industrial marketplaces where companies can advertise that they have certain data which they would like to monetize. And also others where you have open ecosystems in the formation. And that's something we want to regulate so that we really bring trust to these actors and we prescribe a neutral role for them. And that neutrality basically first and foremost means they cannot have an interest in the data that are being transacted. They're really like, I would say, a real estate agent or like a credit card company who facilitates transactions as a service, but who is not having an interest in what is being transacted. They should not want your data. They should only want to keep your data safe and to help you as a consumer or as a company to find users for your data, advise you with the legal part of this, maybe help you as a consumer to really see that you only agree to the certain purposes that you want to be agreed, and that would then be a service. It would certainly also from an economic model be a different bet, and that's maybe where the most important part lies, that the economic incentive would be not on eyeing for the value of the data that is being exchanged, but that you have a very simple basic model of monetary compensation for this. And the compensation could come depending on the successfulness of either model from the individuals, which is maybe less likely, but it could certainly come, and others will maybe explain this better in the following presentations, from the transactions that come. So if companies obtain good quality data about individuals directly from the individual, from their personal data space, then they may be willing to give a transaction fee to the intermediary, and others will explain that this will not be a lot. It will be actually, given also the cost of these infrastructures, actually very, very little in comparison to the value that is being generated out of the transaction of the data. So that's the core. You cannot eye for the data, and also, as I said, not for the connection data, for the metadata, for the interaction data. How often do people use this service? What do they transact with whom? What's the economic social graph of me or of a small firm? That should be of no concern. You can use this for improving your service, but you cannot sell this basically as business intelligence to anyone else. That's, I think, the two things are very important. And then we have, I think, taken away very important economic incentives that have driven, in our view, the data economy partly into also a negative direction where people feel surveillance capitalism or other things, and we now come to a new model. It's very important, maybe also to say at this point, that this new data intermediary model is eyeing for a specific kind of service. It is not regulating any data sharing in the economy. The traditional, if I can say, model of I give you my data, you give me a service, will continue to exist. It will continue to be not regulated by the Data Governance Act. That's very important. We only say if you want to make recourse to a new type of intermediary from the start of this emerging economic set of intermediaries, we want to that they are bound by a relatively strict set of rules. And this is what we're currently negotiating. So different maybe also from the Japanese example, which you may have heard of. We are not proposing a certification or a technical framework at this stage. We're first wanting to see how they emerge, and we're coming in rather from the legal side of things in terms of what business activity can be allowed and not be allowed. And again, this results also from the very productive study of the Mydeater community and the models that are being being experimented there. So we want to see how it goes. We have not a sunset clause, but a review clause of 5 years, 4 years actually foreseen. So in 4 years we will see how these rules have impacted, and then also we can, in the next mandate of the new commission, can correct it. Maybe in my last slide, I would like to advertise just a number of things that we also fund on the research innovation side. We have a large, probably the world's largest research and innovation program called Horizon Europe. And here we give directly grants to consortia of scientific centers together with companies who basically experiment and try to develop technologies, not necessarily always new technologies, but then also trying out certain technologies. And these are, there are 4 projects listed here on this slide: PimCity, Data Vaults, Kraken, and Smashit. And they all are trying to implement some sort of individual-centric data governance with personal data spaces. And the final icon on the top, on the bottom right, is the Next Generation Internet Initiative. In this context, we give relatively small grants, 50,000 euros, which is like maybe 60,000 US dollars, to, if I did my conversion right, to for rather detailed and targeted development. So yeah, look up for these to see also the results being disseminated, and maybe also establish relationships there. That comes on top of the commercial players that you will see later on. With this, I would like to thank you for having listened to this web talk. I wish you good success with the rest of this webinar and the conference, and a lot of interest. And yeah, if you want, thank you for your attention, and keep in touch. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Antti Joki-Poikola. I'm the chair of board from Mydei터gl로벌, non-profit association that aims for data sovereignty and human-centric use of personal data. I also live in Helsinki, and I will be showcasing one use case, Mydei터 use case from the city of Helsinki. To get started with, Helsinki is the capital city of Finland. Helsinki has 660,000 people living, and the whole Finland has 5.5 million inhabitants. So small country in the Northern Europe. Mydei터 is human-centric approach to personal data management. And the mission of Mydei터glóbal is to advance fair, sustainable, and prosperous digital society through human-centric approach to personal data. On one hand, people should get value from their data and set the agenda on how it is used. And on the other hand, for organizations, the ethical use of personal data should be always the most attractive option. Mydeita.org-declaration is the place to find the underlying principles that we follow in Mydeita. And I believe that many people here in the Data Sovereignty Conference will undersign most of the principles. So we are aiming at 3 big shifts. The first one is to move from formal to actionable rights. So it's not quite enough that we have good legislation for rights, people's rights over their data, but we need to be making the execution of those rights practically easy for people. And this leads to the second big shift, which is moving from data protection to empowerment with data. So by all means, we want to have very good data protection. That's the baseline. But on top of it, we believe that people should be able to get benefits from their data. So be protected, but be also empowered to use your data. And third big shift is moving from closed to open ecosystems. So we believe very much in interoperability and standards, and also business practices that make it possible to connect several players together instead of having these winner takes all data ecosystems, which we see currently in the world. So governments have been adopting Mydeita ideas and approaches already on several levels. We are very happy to see that Mydeita was explicitly mentioned in the European data strategy that was published last year in 2020. There it says that Mydeita is one of the movements that will provide benefits for individuals from their data in several areas. In Finland, the Finnish government agenda includes also mention about Mydeita. So there it says that the government will provide individuals access to their data in the public information sources according to Mydeita principles, which is great, and this is very necessary. And Mydeita operators, I will lightly touch this topic before going to the use case of City of Helsinki so that you better understand the use case. So in order to make this Mydeita world actually functioning, we need to have some sort of services that facilitate connecting different data sources and data using services in the human-centric way. So we call these Mydeita operators as interconnected human-centric data intermediaries. This is to showcase how the management of personal data typically is and how we envision it to become through Mydeita operators and Mydeita principles. So currently, organizations manage the whole value chain for data, from collection to management and the usage of the data. So, for example, in the case of cities, typically the city organization, they collect some data from the citizens in order to provide services. They manage the data according to the law, of course, and they use it. But this is becoming more and more challenged because the same data could be used in different use cases, and now it needs to be recollected and remanaged all over in different services instead of being able to share the data. So currently integrating data from multiple sources is really hard. We envision that in the future there will be specialized services for different parts of the value chain, and especially to the management part, and that's what we call Mydeita operators. So there could be collection of data in one place and then human-centric personal data management through Mydeita operators, and then the same data could be used in several use cases. And this is exactly the thing what's gonna happen in the city of Helsinki. So in this sense, the Mydeita operators, they facilitate data ecosystems. They facilitate the connections between individuals, the people, and the data sources and data using services. And again, if I take this city as an example, city provides tens or even hundreds of different services to the citizens, and almost all of them, they somehow use personal data. So there will be hundreds of different data or IT systems in the city, and they can be data sources and they can be also data using services, but currently they are not easily interconnectable because the law says that personal data can be used only to the purpose where it was collected. And maybe if somebody collected my data in one purpose, they cannot reutilize it in other purpose. And that makes it very clumsy to create public services, for example. We don't expect that the whole world will be connecting in one Mydeita operator. We definitely don't want to see this winner-takes-all situation. So instead of that, we believe in the network effects. We believe that there will be standardized Mydeita operators that create network in the same way like phone operators currently create global network. If I get somebody's phone number, it doesn't matter if they are using the same phone operator or if they are even from different country. If I have the phone number, the phone call can be connected. The same we expect that will be happening for the data sources and data using services. with the operator network. So this requires these Mydeater operators to be interoperable among themselves so that it would be possible to change an operator also without breaking all of your digital services. So last year, Mydeaterglobal run this Mydeater Operators Award process, where we requested these kind of data intermediaries to provide information on how they are operating, and we evaluated them carefully according to or against the Mydeater principles. And in the end of last year, we awarded 27 operators that are coming from 15 different countries. Here is the slide with logos of these different operators. So most of them are from Europe still, but there are operators from Asia and also from US. So now the case, use case from City of Helsinki. So City of Helsinki aims to be the most functional digital city in the world. And for that, they are also taking the use of Mydeater principles. And Mydeater principles will guide the Finnish capital to ensure that people retain control over their data and trust how it is used in the city. And at the same time, it enables more of digital services. So this project is a 2-year project, 2020 to 2021. And the name of the project is City as a Mydeater Operator. It has the goals of defining the Mydeater principles, how they can be applied in cities, and build practical solutions that demonstrate these Mydeater capabilities, being able to provide data from one source to another under the individual's full control. And also the underlying big goal is, of course, to increase trust between public sector and the residents of the city. Expected benefits are for the citizens, time savings and easiness for daily life. And for the city itself, they are aiming to, with this human-centric way, to use the data so that it can enable scalable and seamless digital services across the administrative silos. Silos meaning the different parts of the city that currently cannot really share data among themselves. This project has 2.6 million euros funding from the Ministry of Finance from Finland, and 2 of the Mydeater operators that were mentioned earlier are actually involved in this project. So there is Mydeater Share from Vastu Group and Personium from Fujitsu involved in this project. The use case is reduced daycare fee, and the background is that by the law in Finland, the cities have to organize daycare services for all the children. It's not free of charge, so people do pay for the daycare services, but there is reduced fee for depending on the income level of the parents. And currently, City of Helsinki organizes daycare for 27,000 children annually, and there are eligibility criteria for parents who can get this reduced daycare fee. And the use case is that to make it seamless and fully digital, so that parents could, with the button, push of a button, provide the needed information to justify for the reduced daycare fee if they are in that category. And currently the state is so that people need to fill by manually forms where they detail their income, and then they provide in PDF format the data from the tax office or some other registries, the justifications that their income is below the level so that they could get this reduced fee. And the future vision is that citizen can authorize the city to verify the annual income directly from the tax office, fully digitally with consent, so that city can automatically check whether the citizen is eligible for the reduced daycare fee, and even make the decision fully automatic, because it's like rule. If you earn below some level, you get the reduced fee, no discussion needed. So this is just one use case from this idea from the city of Helsinki, that they want to provide the city services proactively, and there are always different kinds of needs for different data from here and there, and all this data management could be handled in this Mydeater way. So this is just a schematic on how would it work, or what is being built in this Mydeater operator in the city of Helsinki. So in the first moment, the city will request consent through Mydeater operator from the parents, and then the parents will give consent so that they can access, city can access the income information of these people directly from the state registry, from the tax office. And with this consent, city will retrieve income information from the tax office, from the state. In a way, this looks rather simple, but the reality is that there are several different jurisdictions, state and the city involved, and there are all sorts of laws and regulation included. So the Mydeater operator is not only the technical part, but it's also the legal part. So there will be the rule book on how it works really. So the business case is the use case for the citizens, the daycare fee, and then the operator provides the technical background and also the legal security. So this was just one use case from the city of Helsinki. They are building several of those in the same project, and the use case is expected to come in beta version out soon this year and go to the production in next year. And I know that there are other cities in different parts of the world going to the same direction. For example, in France, Lyon is active, and I also know of some Asian cities. So if you're interested to ask more, read more, or join Mydeater Global, you're very welcome. So first of all, I would recommend you to go to mydeater.org/papers and download the white paper of Mydeater principles in general, and then also the more specific paper about Mydeater operators. And there are some other links, most important link being mydeater.org/join. You can join as individual member or organizational member to be part of the global movement of making this human-centric personal data happen for real. Thank you very much. My name is Antti Joki-Poikola. I'm board chair from Mydeater Global, and you can find me from Twitter, and also you can find Mydeater from Twitter, and these slides are online. Thank you very much.
Greetings from London. My name is Alan Mitchell, and I'm chairman of a company called Mydex. The theme of this forum, personal data sovereignty, is dear to our heart because that's been our mission since we were founded in 2007, to become the world's first personal data store. Since then, we faced many obstacles and explored many false trails. In doing so, we've learned a huge amount. Today, we think we've found a viable, practical way forward that can achieve system-wide change, that improves citizens' lives, the workings of society, and the efficiency and productivity of our economy. We've realized that data sovereignty is not just about issues like citizen rights, privacy, fairness. It's about something else too. It's about day-to-day practical issues, getting things done with less friction, effort, risk, and cost with greater efficiency and productivity. And it's about capabilities, the ability to do more, better, and different. The solutions we're now implementing are simple at heart. First, we provide citizens with their own personal data stores, which enable them to aggregate copies of data held about them from multiple different sources. This makes the individual the point of integration of their own data. Then we enable individuals to share this data with service providers in a way that's safe, reliable, efficient, so that service providers can trust and use this data without having to recreate it, recollect it, or even check it, so that personal data can be made once and used many times. Human rights, privacy, fairness are built into the design of everything we do. But what we also do is streamline information tasks, eliminating duplication of effort and eliminating the frustration of recollecting and representing the same information that has already been collected and checked many times before. At the heart of this new personal data logistics infrastructure lies a special form of data. We call them verified attributes. You may call them government or organization certified personal data. We enable citizens, individuals, to collect secure tokens that certify information about themselves, to store these tokens in their personal data stores, and to keep these tokens automatically up to date, and to share these tokens with service providers securely, efficiently, when needed. In doing so, we're transforming the way services are delivered. Let me give you some examples. Glasgow is the biggest city in Scotland with around 600,000 citizens. Every year, around 20,000 of them are diagnosed with cancer. Guess how many organizations they could end up dealing with in the course of their journey, hopefully to remission. It's over 200. When they think about cancer, most people think about the medical side of it, hospitals, doctors, and so on. But for patients, that's just one part of it, because they have to deal with the impact of the disease on the rest of their lives. They may face employment issues, losing or needing to change their job. They may face financial difficulties, losing income. They may face housing issues, needing to move or change the layout of their homes. They will need to deal with multiple specialist service providers. For example, providing wigs when their hair falls out due to radiation therapy. And they have to manage domestic arrangements, getting to and from appointments, who will pick the kids up from school when I'm not able to. And to make all of this happen, they have to share information for each step of each task with each and every service provider. So we've done two things. First, we've built the technology needed to simplify the creation of web apps. Web apps are like the apps you use on your smartphone, except that you can access them from any device on the web, and you don't have to download them from an app store owned by the likes of Google or Apple. Using our web apps, we work with the citizens and frontline workers who know what needs to be done, including the data points they need, to map the journey in everyday language. No need to know anything about software. We then turn the specification into an easy-to-use interface where all the information that is needed can be collected, shared, and used. Every web app is automatically linked to the individual's personal data store. So any new information that is generated goes back to their PDS so that they can use this information again and again with other service providers as and when needed. Using these web apps, we have created what we call circles. Circles are where a specific group of people are brought together on the patient's invitation to share specific types of data for specific purposes. When managing cancer, for example, patients dealing with medical practitioners need to share different sorts of information than dealing with friends, family, and carers about domestic arrangements, or when dealing with specialist service providers. By enabling the sharing of relevant data, including verified attributes, circles are much more than chat groups. They're a means by which stuff gets done. The sharing of alerts, messages, referrals, calendar events, and so on. Now, the benefits of this approach don't only flow to the individual in terms of saving lots of hassle, they also flow to the service providers. Macmillan, the cancer charity we've been working with to lead this project, employs link workers to help patients through different stages of their journey. Each patient takes up to 12 hours of administrative work, creating and updating client records, supporting clients with applications for financial and support services, providing them with tailored information, and so on. Using our personal data stores, web apps and circles, we are taking up to 11 hours of the time spent on more complex cases, a cost saving of over 90%. Overall, reductions in administrative burdens on link workers mean they can serve double the number of patients in the same amount of time. Dramatic productivity improvements, in other words. We've also built what we call smart directories. With a smart directory, an individual can publish an anonymized profile of themselves to a specified set of service providers, so that service providers can see whether or not that individual is eligible to receive other services. Working with Glasgow City Council, we're using smart directories to help citizens find and access services they are entitled to, and to help the council find and serve these citizens more efficiently. For example, many people on social security benefits are entitled to a school uniform allowance that helps them pay for school uniforms for their children. But though they're entitled to this benefit, they do not claim it, either because they don't know it exists or because they can't face the hassle of applying for it. With the Smart Directory, Glasgow City Council can match the anonymised profiles to eligibility criteria for the allowance. They then send a message to the profile via the Include platform saying, "We think you are entitled to this benefit. Would you like to receive it?" The platform then forwards the message to the individual, and if the individual says yes, then the PDS automatically completes the form, so Glasgow can send a message back saying you will start getting the benefit in 2 weeks' time, without any form filling. What used to take months now takes minutes. All this directly under the control of the individual, with data sharing agreements designed to protect the individual's data and privacy. In addition, working with the Scottish Government, we've developed a strategy to implement this idea across the provision of all Scottish Government public services. The strategy has been accepted, and the Scottish Government and the resulting Scottish Attribute Provider Service is currently in procurement. So my message today is very simple. 1. Empowering individuals with their own data can bring practical, direct, economic, as well as social benefits. 2, the infrastructure and tools for doing so have already been built, are in operation, and are delivering these benefits. 3, the infrastructure is available for everyone to use, including in Korea. But there's another side to what we've learned in our 15 years. We've discovered there are many ways to get this wrong as well as right, and that there are certain design principles that need to be adopted if mistakes are to be avoided. First, we need to be clear on what a personal data store is and what it is not. A personal data store or vault or wallet can never achieve its full social or economic potential if the data it holds remains tethered to an organization in some way. Personal data stores are not an extension of today's organization-centric data architecture. They are a new, separate, independent layer of personal data logistics infrastructure. This means many things. It means that citizens should be able to collect data from any and all of the services they have dealings with no walls or restrictions put on what data they can collect. They should also be able to share their data with anyone they want to, without restriction. Data sharing within a walled garden is not genuine personal data sovereignty. Also, personal data store providers should not be able to look into or see the data held in the personal data store. They should operate on a zero-knowledge basis. That's why at Mydex, for example, every individual holding one of our personal data stores holds their own encryption key, and why we don't know what this encryption key is. We provide them with a box, but only they have the key to open this box. Incentives need to be aligned to this architecture. The personal data store provider cannot be incentivized to make money out of the individual's data. That may seem obvious if we're talking about selling or renting data in the personal data store, but it's less obvious when a personal data store provider makes money from the amount of data that the individual shares. If, for example, the PDS provider makes money from charging a transaction fee each time the individual shares some data, that means the provider has inbuilt financial incentives to get the individual to share more and more data. That's not genuine personal data sovereignty. It's an invitation to a new form of data exploitation. That is why we as a company do not charge any transaction fees. We charge organizations a fee to connect to our platform for the service of making data sharing possible. Another essential design principle is stability and longevity, permanence. For a personal data store to be of true service to the individual, it has to last a lifetime. That means the personal data store has to last a lifetime. It has to act as a permanent piece of infrastructure, like the water pipes that feed our homes and offices. So the PDS provider must be subject to strong, watertight, legally enforceable restrictions on changes to purpose and function. Now, there are many new companies now operating in this space that are funded by venture capitalists. The one thing venture capitalists want above all is an exit. They want to sell what they've invested in. No matter what promises a company makes, if it's funded by venture capitalists, these promises may count for nothing once the company is sold. The purpose of a personal data store is to empower individuals with their data, not to act as a vehicle for someone else's enrichment. That is why Mydex is legally constituted under UK law as a community interest company. We're a mission-driven company, and our mission is to empower individuals with their own data. Crucially, that mission is a legal requirement for our operations. So, for example, none of our assets can be sold unless they're sold to another entity equally committed to this mission. We are not designed to be sold to the highest bidder. We are built to last, not for 3 years or 5 years, but for the next 3 decades, 5 decades, and beyond. So to finish, I've talked about our experience of making personal data sovereignty work in the UK public sector. The 3 main lessons from our experience are these. First, providing citizens with their own personal data stores to enable the sharing of verified attributes or certified credentials not only protects citizens' privacy, but unleashes big practical benefits, reducing friction, effort, risk, and cost for both citizens and service providers, while improving the speed and quality of service provision. Second, the necessary infrastructure and tools have already been built and are already in use and are available for use by others. Third, while the opportunities are huge, so are the pitfalls. Even with the best of intentions, if the right design principles are not adopted, it is highly unlikely that the benefits we're talking about will be realized. There is a huge opportunity to be seized here. I strongly recommend you seize it, but do so with your eyes wide open. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Julian Ranger, the Exec President and founder of DigiMe, and I'm here today to talk to you about personal data sovereignty and the use cases that can enable. If we look today, our personal data, which can cover everything from our posts on social media, our bank data, our health data, wearables, our purchases, all of which is personal data, is being constrained, and rightly so. We have concerns about the business practices and the way our data is collected without our consent. But the issue is that if we are to get to where we want to get to with new capabilities, whether that's personalized health, in consumer engagement, in financial services, and others, then we need to have rich, quality consumer data, personal data available. But we need to have it clearly with full privacy, security, and consent. And that, therefore, shifts us, moves us to what we might call consumer or human centricity. And that's enabled by what is called data portability, the ability of the individual to get their data. And there are various legislations around the world, the EU General Data Protection Regulation, the US California Consumer Privacy Act, the Australian Consumer Data Requirement, and others. So what is this human centricity? Well, it's basically a different data model. It democratizes data, putting privacy, security, and consent at the center. But why? Well, the reality is, if we put privacy to one side, we actually can't gather all the data together in a single repository about an individual to then use in any case, because data stovepipes where that data is held prevent businesses doing so. So with three critical insights, we can see why we should have human centricity. The first is only you, the individual, know where all your data sources are. What doctors and hospitals you visit, which social networks you use, what banks you use, where you buy stuff, which media services you use. And only you, the individual, have the right of access to a full copy of your data. And finally, only you have unlimited data usage rights for your data. An example I often give is that I can get my medical data, print it off, put it on the windows of my car and drive around and show the world. That is my right. But if anybody else broadcasts my medical data in that way, they would be breaching the law. So recognizing that it is impossible for businesses to aggregate that, and with these three critical insights, it becomes clear that if we want to aggregate rich data, data that is across all our categories, deep in time, fully accurate, and all about a single individual, then we must do it at the individual. So then I suppose the question comes, how do we do that? Well, that's where my company DigiMe comes in, and there are others. Generically, we are termed data facilitators. And simply, an individual is enabled through an application, a data facilitator, DigiMe in our case, to connect to their data sources and receive a full history of their data. And that could be pulled through an API or pushed into their system. All that data is stored in a personally encrypted library for the individual. It's not held by the data facilitator, or it shouldn't be in any case. So with DigiMe, it's a personally encrypted library held by the individual. The individual is the only one with the encryption key. And once an individual has their data, they can then consent to share it. Now, that might be with an app, a web service, across all sorts of different domains, and we'll look at some use case examples later. And they also have the DigiMe app for displaying the data, being able to see it, and managing their consents. Now, we'll also see later, however, that you don't have to come and get your data first to then share it. It's important that we streamline the way individuals can join this new environment, be empowered with their data. And I'll cover that in a little while. But first, it's also really important to know that this is all about the individual collecting the data, because we need it to be able to share and access new services, but to do it with full privacy, because only they have their data. DigiMe, as we say, knows nothing about you. We don't see, touch, or hold the data. It is held by the individual in their own encrypted store. It's fully private, fully secure, and data is only shared with the explicit and informed consent of the individual. And that is done through a consent certificate. So how do we bring that on board? How do we make sure that we can enter this new world in a low friction experience? We as individuals are not inclined to do a lot of steps to get a service or something that we need. So how do we achieve this move to human centricity without making it difficult to do so? Let me give you an example. So I'm going to example with this app called Consentry. Now, Consentry is a COVID health pass. It helps hold your PCR tests, your lateral flow rapid antigen tests, if you've experienced those, and enables you to hold it yourself and then be able to show it if you need to travel or enter an event or anything else. Now, in this particular example I'm showing you, it's also linking into your health records to get your vaccine data, but it doesn't have access to that. So it's going to use DigiMe, getting data via the individual, to be able to hold that data for the individual. So in this case, in the app with the green bar here, you can see, it obviously has to explain that to me. So I select to import my vaccine record. It says it's going to use a third-party data facilitator to help the individual get their data and share it with the app. And then the app can query the DigiMe API and see what sources of data it might want to present to its user. So in this case, it's presented the English GP records, Icelandic, Netherlands, and USA, all of which we support. The individual then, in this case, selects the England GP records, and that's when DigiMe comes into play. So the first thing that happens is a consent certificate is displayed. And the consent certificate must meet the bar for explicit and informed consent, so that I, the individual, know exactly what I'm going to do with it, why I'm sharing the data, what will be accessed, what it will be used for. And if I am happy with that consent and I can dive down and see the details, then I can authenticate the source of data, in this case, the UK's National Health Service records, and then DigiMe will receive the data, put it in my personally encrypted library, and send the extract that is requested by the consent certificate to, in this case, the Consentry app, and the Consentry app can then process it, in this case, display it if I want to show it to a third party. And that can then, the Consentry app can then get a continual access to that data if I've allowed it through my consent certificate. So an individual need never have used DigiMe before to onboard into this new world of human centricity. Now, within 3 to 5 years, and maybe less, we as individuals will know that holding our data, not just health data or finance data, but across all spectrum of our interactions as individuals, we will know that holding our data makes sense because of the many use cases, many things we can do with it. But we have to move from today, where we don't necessarily understand that, to this new world. And that low friction ability that I just showed you is really important to that. Now, does this work? Is this just a dream, or can it work? Well, let's look at some test trials that we've done and also some use cases that are being progressed. So back in 2019, 2 years ago, we did a big project with a number of large companies in the UK, including the likes of Facebook from the US as well, and the government, run by a company called Control Shift, with DigiMe as the data facilitator. There is a report on that, you can download that, but the important thing was that it concluded that yes, personal data sharing can be made safe from the perspective of the individual, that you can get valuable services from that, new valuable use cases, and that the breadth of data, the ability to look across an individual, is critical to the new value creation. So there's a lot of different terms for this. Sometimes it's called human centricity or citizen centricity if it's related to the government, or patient centricity if it's to do with health. It's also called me to business and different things. And here, for example, are some brands and being looked at in terms of how we can share data for new services. So let's have a look at some use cases now. And one of the first that I'm going to look at is about the health data ecosystem in its entirety, not just a small use case, but radically improving and helping the whole of the health data ecosystem. And there's a lot been written about this at the Future of Patient Data and other places under the guise of what's called patient centricity. So if we look at any normal health data ecosystem, it consists of hospitals, general practice, doctors that you visit first line, maybe pharmacies and prescriptions, private care and social care. And there's a level of data transfer between those entities. Never fully, or rarely fully, I should say, rather than never, across the world. Then we also have a research community, and some data can be shared. Often there are consent issues at that. But there's a lot of other data available that we're just not able to share, whether that's the patient's wearables and other connected devices, their nutrition, and other data which might be relevant. Genomics, my social data, which is of interest for mental state. And so if I'm going to have apps to help me with manage my health, where are they going to get the data? They can get a bit direct from the patient, but they don't have access to the wider medical records. And we want to move to a situation today where we've got health service apps so that we can do remote monitoring, we can do prescriptions via apps, and actually apps to help us with our conditions. But there isn't a full digital flow. There's many gaps. We are left in a situation where we can't have a full health system. And it's impractical to try and connect this up fully point to point. And in any case, how would you handle patient consent on a lot of these links that don't handle the patient? And this has been a dilemma for the health system for decades. But there is a simple solution. If all the data goes via the individual, then you have one place where all the data comes together with consent, and it means that all data can flow. So whether that's my nutrition data flowing back into my GP or my wearables, or my prescriptions coming down to me so that I can use consumer apps or health service apps, if I want to share my full longitudinal data with the research community, everybody can have a full set of data. Now, you'll still keep the other connections, of course, the connections between the hospitals and the GPs. But by bringing in the individual at the center, you can enable all the data, and it's cheaper and it's simpler to do, as well as being better. And it enables the whole of the health ecosystem to come together. But outside health, there's a big market for personalized services. There's a lot here. We've did a study and then some follow-on work with a company called CX Loyalty and MasterCard. Most of you know MasterCard very well. And looked at an enormous range of areas where personalization for the individual to give us better services, more tailored to us, can be enabled through human centricity or Me2B. So we looked at a variety of consumer services and recognizing that brands have very limited information about individuals. And when you looked at the offers that they were made, they really weren't reflecting the preferences of any individual. And they're less engaged if they receive offers that are not their preferences. But we can move such that I can share my data, my social data, my previous purchases, if I wish to do so, so that the brands can create a profile about me that's consented, that is only for the purpose that I share it. They're not allowed to then share that data on with others. And I can get rewarded through relevant offers that match me. And as an example, CX Loyalty, ourselves and MasterCard, were looking through a number of different options. So for example, taking KLM, I can share my travel and social media and music streaming, so KLM knows when I'm traveling around important dates. They can detect that I love steak and that Lutje is my favorite restaurant, and I've got no travel arrangements, and they can see that, in this case, my favorite musician is Ed Sheeran. Now, can put all of that together and give me a tailored offer so that I can attend the concert at the place that I want to and arrive there. Now, that's an advanced use case, but it's perfectly possible, and these use cases are now starting to happen. There are many, many other use case examples, and I'd encourage you to go to digi.me/use cases where you can see these. And these have all come about through concept studies, actual implementations, things that people are doing. So please have a look. The human-centric economy is here, and it has an enormous amount of challenges. It solves the privacy, security, and consent issues that we face. But it also helps businesses, and I want to emphasize this. Today, we think a lot of our data is used, but it's only a very small subset used primarily for advertising and a little bit elsewhere. But there is so much more we can use that data, as I've talked about in health, consumer personalization, finance, and others. But getting that data is extremely challenging for businesses. It's difficult to source. It's of highly variable quality if it's not from the individual. Lots of different data formats, requires extensive data analytics because of 1 to 3, is expensive and time consuming to implement, and rightly is constrained by the new legislation. But if we source it direct from the individual, as I've just explained, then it's easy to access. You just ask the individual. It's rich, high-quality data because it's direct from the source and validated as such. The data can all be normalized, something that DigiMe does, because it's done at one point. And that means that we can actually use the data with less complex analytics to extract the features we need to give the services that individuals want. And it's inexpensive and inordinately quick to start, can be done in hours. If you want to try, please go to play.digi.me, play.digi.me, and see how easy it is to enter this new world. And it's all 100% private, fully secure, consented, and enables trust. So we can empower the personal data economy today, sharing more data, but doing so with privacy, security, and consent, giving greater value to all. And there is only one thing we need to do: empower the individual with their data. The individual can have their data, the rest flows from there. Thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry I can't be here in person due to the current COVID restrictions, but please feel free to email me or send me a message on Twitter. Many thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Emma Day. I'm a human rights lawyer, and my presentation today will be about the UNICEF Manifesto on Good Data Governance for Children. I'm one of the authors of this manifesto, alongside Linda Raftree and Jasmina Byrne, who is the UNICEF Chief of Global Policy. But first, I would like to congratulate the organisers for arranging this conference on data sovereignty. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I hope my presentation will explain how this topic of data sovereignty is important for children. I would like to begin by playing a short animation made by UNICEF to explain what we mean by children's data.
Even before a child is born, their data is being collected. From birth, their photos are being uploaded to the internet. That's data. They are observed through cameras and toys. That's data. As they grow older, kids learn to use mobile phones and tablets to play games and learn. That's data. Soon, kids graduate to social media and messaging apps, creating even more data points with every click. That's data. All that data is collected by tech companies big and small, and often used for their own financial benefit. Governments, too, collect information on children, from birth registration to school records. That's data. In fact, by the time a child turns 18, tens of thousands of data points have already been collected about them. Unfettered data collection can build a culture of surveillance, threatening children's privacy and freedom. Children's data may be used to manipulate their choices and behavior. Critical decisions about children's lives are often made based on their data without their participation or knowledge. Decisions like how welfare benefits should be allocated or where schools are built. These factors and decisions will not just shape a childhood, but they might follow them into adulthood. But by protecting children and their data, we can build trust that it will be used responsibly. That's why UNICEF gathered 17 leading global experts and together launched a manifesto, a set of 10 demands to protect children and their data. A manifesto that articulates a vision for a better future for children's data. A manifesto that imagines a future where data governance is designed to deliver for children. A manifesto that demands capacities and circumstances of children inform regulation. We are not powerless in the face of a flood of children's data. You can take action. Learn more about the manifesto and discover how you can build a world that's a better place for children and their data.
Data that is collected and used positively can help children. It can help to make public services effective and to improve the evidence related to things like childhood diseases, the most effective teaching and learning methods, and the kinds of social welfare support that most improve children's lives. But when data is gathered and used unethically, it can lead to harms, such as targeting children for advertising of unhealthy foods, tobacco and alcohol, breaches of children's privacy where their sensitive data is shared without safeguards in place, and profiling of children based on flawed algorithms that entrench patterns of discrimination contained in the data used to train them. In the manifesto, we examine how children's data is used by various actors, how the challenges that children face can be overcome, and what can be collectively done to maximize the benefits of children's data use. Our starting premise was that children's data is significantly different to adults' data because children are more vulnerable than adults, and depending on their age, maturity, and capacity, they are less likely than adults to understand the implications of their long-term data collection. The key message that we wanted to convey through this manifesto is that harnessing of data for social good must not be at the expense of children's privacy, protection, and well-being. Over the past year, we worked with 17 global experts, and you can see their names on this slide. These are all the colleagues and experts that we met with over the course of 1 year to explore emerging trends and to analyse different aspects of data governance. These 17 experts helped us highlight the gap between the world we want for children and today's reality. We found there was a big gap at the level of government in many cases. We're seeing some governments really struggle with how to collect and use data in ways that contribute to better development and well-being, while at the same time ensuring that they're not exposing their citizens to risks from data capture, for example, by the private sector. We also found there's a lack of expertise in the data governance sector on child rights, and that children are often seen as a side issue, whereas in reality, children make up around 1/3 of internet users, and their rights need to be integrated into all data governance initiatives. Together, we laid out our vision for governments, the private sector, and public and private welfare bodies to develop agreements, frameworks, and mechanisms to uphold children's privacy and rights. You can find out more about these working group members and the background papers they wrote to inform this manifesto, which are all available on our website. With the help of our working group of 17 experts, we identified 8 key areas of concern for children's data, as you can see on this slide. We identified the emergence of a kind of surveillance culture, enabled by new technologies and data from or about children and their activities. Government surveillance is common amongst both democracies and authoritarian regimes throughout the world, and it can be seen to have a chilling effect on children and youth activists, and on children's freedom of expression and access to information. There's also increasing surveillance of children by the private sector, who mine children's data for advertising and marketing, and sometimes use this data to manipulate children's behaviour. The last 2 concerns on the list on this slide are very specific to children. Number 7 highlights that there's been insufficient attention paid to children's evolving capacities or different abilities. The Convention on the Rights of the Child requires us to consider the evolving capacities of the child in recognition of the fact that childhood is a time of great change and development for children. There's obviously a lot of difference between the capacity of a 3-year-old to the capacity of a 10-year-old, and then again a 16-year-old. Childhood is a time when children experiment with their identity, and they need to be protected from profiling using data that categorizes and fixes their capacity, skills, or interests at a young age. Generally, in data protection laws and policies, children under 13 or 14 are lumped together, and children aged between 13 and 17 are also considered as another category. Whereas within these categories of children have different levels of agency and capacity to understand the short and long-term implications of data being collected from them and used for various reasons. Number 8 on this slide specifically raises the issue of consent, which is the basis on which most data processing from children and adults is carried out today. In practice, we know that children aged over 13, which is a common age when children are deemed capable of consenting to data processing in many countries, have varying degrees of capacity to understand the implications of data processing about them. We know that data literacy programs in schools are not common across the world, so most children will not be well enough informed to understand what they're consenting to. For younger children, consent is usually sought from children's parents, but there remain many issues with, again, parents being well informed enough to know the implications of what they're consenting to, and often being worried that if they don't consent, their children will be excluded from access to services or social opportunities with their peers. Part of the manifesto looks at global data governance regimes and notes that there's no comprehensive global governance regime for data in general, so it's difficult to create one just for children. We note that the development of data governance regimes is driven by the primacy given to the data economy and geopolitics, and this has led to data protection laws from the US, Europe, and China dominating the world. Also, in the absence of a global data governance regime, in many instances, the private sector exercises a kind of de facto governance over the public's data, including children's data. Large multinational companies in particular set their own norms and standards in the absence of government regulations. At the same time, the growing global data economy is a driver of good data governance, and we're seeing increasing support from the private sector for regulation where it doesn't exist, and requests for improvements to regulations that are not keeping pace with changes in technology. Children form a large part of the global data economy, and good data governance for children makes good business sense. This image is taken from a study done by Sitra, an independent public foundation from Finland. They carried out a 2-week study of the online data flows of 6 individuals to illustrate the complexity of the data ecosystem. The aim of the study was to find out how much data is being collected from each individual and which 30 third-party companies have access to the data. This graphic shows the data transmitted by the cell phone of a 16-year-old boy. His data were transmitted to 114 companies and a total of 44 advertising companies, the largest amount of data of all of the study subjects. The study also included a politician, a journalist, a company director, and a retiree, but the most data were transmitted from the 16-year-old. The manifesto consists of 10 action points, which we identified as being game changers for children's data governance. The first 3 action points call on governments to develop policies and strengthen norms, standards, and principles that uphold children's rights in data use. The first action point says that child-centered governance means that children's rights should be a specific and central element of all international, regional, and national legislation related to data governance. Children's data protection and privacy regulations should apply to all public services, including those provided by the private sector and by civil society organizations. Broad international and national data governance frameworks and those specifically addressing children need to build upon, rather than replace, already existing standards for data processing. States should ensure that algorithms used in relation to children, such as safety and monitoring tools, health apps, and behavioral analytics tools are regulated, and that profiling and nudging of children's behavior is strictly minimized. The UN Committee on Digital Cooperation has recommended against opaque black box systems, and UNICEF has called for explainable algorithms for children. Turning to the second action, prioritizing children's best interests in all decisions about their data applies across all sectors and starts with the need for a child rights impact assessment that encompasses the technology's impact across all areas of children's rights and specifically addresses data protection concerns. Platforms that create and administer digital rights for children take on a duty of care towards them which must be fulfilled to realize the fundamental rights of the child. This is the only way that big data, artificial intelligence, and emerging technologies can be harnessed safely and responsibly for the public good and to further children's rights around the world. Third, we recognize that children around the world have unique identities. Their capacities evolve throughout their childhood, and they live in extremely diverse circumstances with varying degrees of parental support. Respect must be accorded to children's right to self-determination. For example, by ensuring their right to data erasure and de-indexation when they reach adulthood, so that data provided when they were children without full understanding of the implications cannot be used to create an enduring profile of the child into their adulthood. We need to give special attention to marginalized groups of children in particular, who can be left behind in data governance frameworks. Algorithms can be biased against children whose characteristics differ from the data used to train the AI. For example, algorithms used in schools to assess students' prior and ongoing learning can facilitate placement in appropriate subject levels. However, if the design of these algorithms doesn't take into account students' nuanced experiences, it may result in low-income and minority students being trapped in low achievement tracks with reduced expectations. Data governance regulations must also address the limits of the anonymization of personal data and the potential harms that can be caused by group data for minority or marginalized groups of children. This needs to be balanced against the danger of excluding groups of children from data sets and thereby excluding them from the benefits of inclusion in scientific research. The second 4 action points call on governments, the private sector, and civil society to implement those norms and standards of data governance for children. Action point 4. Key to a truly rights-based approach to accountability would be a reversal of the current burden on children and their advocates to bring challenges against companies, organizations, and governments for breaches of children's data rights, where the onus is on children to prove rights violations. Instead, it would require governments to mandate companies to increase their reporting and transparency. Action point 5. Collaboration with children and their communities for better data governance could involve devolved or distributed governance structures that allow for greater participation. To be meaningful, participation in data governance by children and their communities requires comprehensive digital and data literacy programs for the public. Children should be involved in the co-creation of data governance protocols and should be active leaders in the stewardship of and access to that data. Lessons could be drawn from data governance models built with Indigenous communities. For example, in New Zealand, Maori models of data governance are being incorporated into government data governance systems, allowing space for collective rights and not just individual privacy and ownership rights. This concept demands clear lines of accountability for the collection of data and calls for both benefit and power sharing. Similarly, children are collectively impacted by data gathered on them at scale. They should therefore be accorded accountability mechanisms, benefit and power sharing. Action point 6. Children or their representatives should be able to invoke internationally agreed norms and standards whenever violations of data rights occur. This could be done by ensuring such norms and standards are reflected in national laws and by creating mechanisms that allow children to seek redress for data rights violations through their local and national courts, by their ombudsperson for children, or through their local data protection authority. Action point 7. Allocation of sufficient financial and human resources by governments, the private sector, and the development sector is fundamental to the incorporation of children's rights into any current or future global data governance regime. It's essential that data protection authorities employ staff with expertise in child rights, and that they visibly and distinctly address children's data and actively enforce regulatory laws to protect children. Technology companies providing services that may be accessed by children should also ensure they have staff trained on child rights, as well as a focal point for children's data governance. The final 3 action points identify enablers of good data governance for children. Action point 8. The need for governments to innovate is becoming a central tenet of public policy making, including in policies related to data. This can include things like regulatory sandboxes, data trusts, and data intermediaries. Regulatory sandboxes allow regulators to engage with innovators working on products and services that are likely to be used by children. The UK Information Commissioner's Office is engaging with innovators intending to implement the age-appropriate design code. Current initiatives accepted by this sandbox include an initiative from a privacy and consent management platform that aims to help companies become compliant with data privacy regulations worldwide, which is seeking to enhance its consent management platform by providing child privacy consent management. Data can be protected, managed, and overseen on behalf of children through the use of data trusts, which provide independent fiduciary stewardship of children's data. They can be used at a city or local level to allow for community consent to data collection, where individual consent may not be feasible. But it's still important for citizens to be involved in decisions on how their community's data is used. In the case of children, some thought would need to be given to parental consent in relation to data trusts, and the age at which children should be deemed competent to consent on their own behalf. Action point 9. There's still a need to fill some knowledge gaps, such as developing a typology of harms caused by breaches of children's data rights, and further developing the concept of consent by children or their parents as it relates to the processing of children's data. Action point 10. This manifesto calls for increased collaboration between data governance actors internationally, and it's crucial that this knowledge transfer is not just from the global north to the global south, but that emerging data governance regimes from all parts of the world that can be usefully applied to children are also considered in global governance regimes. Now that global attention is starting to turn to the need to improve governance of data and of the technology sector in general for everyone, it's critical that children's rights are given due consideration and a central role in new envisaged legal and regulatory landscapes. We hope you will read more about these action points and about the whole manifesto on the UNICEF website. Thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Urban. I am a clinical professor of law at the University of California, Berkeley in the United States. In March, I was appointed by California State Governor Gavin Newsom to be the first chairperson of the board of the new California Privacy Protection Agency. Please note that my remarks today are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the California Privacy Protection Agency, its board, or the state of California. I am delighted to have the opportunity to talk with you today about privacy and personal data policy in California. Please accept my congratulations on this wonderful event and thank you for having me. I am grateful to Secretary Castro Ramirez for her support. I will be talking to you today about the case study of the state of California in the United States, and specifically about its recent approach to consumer privacy and individual data control with the California Consumer Privacy Act and the California Privacy Rights Act. I will first give a bit of local context and background, then describe the California approach, and conclude with some thoughts about local innovations and cross-jurisdiction cooperation. Let me begin with a little context about the state of California and its relationship to privacy policy in the United States. California has nearly 40 million people and the largest subnational economy in the world. If it were a country, it would have the 5th largest economy in the world. California is also known for policy innovation, for example, in environmental protection, in a country that is organized to give states quite a lot of political and economic autonomy compared to many other countries. Supreme Court Justice Brandeis, describing the system in 1932, likened states to laboratories of democracy that could experiment with economics and policies. California has long been an enthusiastic participant in the United States tradition of letting states and localities experiment in ways that fit their own populations. Because of California's size and innovative traditions, its experiments tend to influence the rest of the country over time. Indeed, there's a commonly heard saying here in the United States that, as goes California, so goes the nation. It is also important to cover a bit of the background against which California developed its approach to privacy. In the US, personal privacy and data protection have long followed a similar distributed model. While there are federal laws that protect a few kinds of data, for example, medical data held by medical providers, student information, and credit data, the United States does not have a comprehensive federal data privacy law like, for example, Europe's General Data Protection Regulation. Instead, privacy and data protection is distributed across sectors and states. For example, the traditional privacy torts come from state common law, and states regularly develop additional laws such as state-by-state data breach notification laws. Second, in general, privacy in the United States has long been focused on the on the individual as a market actor. That is, focused on individuals' personal information and individuals' personal choices in the marketplace. For decades, the dominant model for consumer privacy in the United States has been the so-called notice and choice model. The basic idea is that consumers will be given notice of how their data will be used and shared by a business, and then can make a choice about whether to accept the business proposition that is being offered. If consumers reject the business proposition, then businesses with more attractive offerings in terms of consumer privacy will win consumers' business. It is now widely accepted that notice and choice, as historically practiced in the US, has not functioned effectively to protect consumer privacy. It has failed for a number of interrelated reasons. The first is poor notice. Anyone who has read a few privacy policies on US company websites, at least as they existed until recently, knows that they very often have provided at best poor notice. They can be impenetrable to read, take much longer to read and understand than is realistic, and still not give complete information about what the company is doing with consumers' information. This makes it impossible for the consumer to make an informed choice. The second issue is a lack of meaningful choice. In many situations, the choice the consumer is given is really take it or leave it, meaning accept what we do with your data, even if you do not know exactly what that is, or you do not get to buy our product or service. A third issue is a lack of enforcement. Traditionally, there have been few, if any, requirements for privacy notices, although California itself has had a law governing privacy policy since 2003. The Federal Trade Commission can enforce against companies whose privacy policies are unfair or deceptive, but there has not been a comprehensive law. More recently, a number of jurisdictions have been working to create a more equitable system in which individuals can make genuine choices about their data and businesses have clear rules to follow. Gyeonggi Province's Mydeai터 platform project is an example, as is Europe's General Data Protection Regulation. I'm pleased to present the case of California, which has recently enacted some of the farthest reaching reforms in the United States. California has long been a leader in consumer privacy in the US. California's state constitution explicitly protects the privacy of California citizens, and California has led other states in developing privacy protections. For example, among other things, California in 2003 enacted the law governing privacy policies that I mentioned earlier, and also in 2003 enacted the first data breach notification law in the United States. Today, California is leading the effort to give consumers meaningful rights to control their data and to give businesses clear rules to follow through two new laws, the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, or CCPA, and the California Privacy Rights Act of 2020, or CPRA, which amends the CCPA. The CCPA took effect on January 1st, 2020, and the CPRA was passed in November 2020. I will refer to this legal regime as the CCPA unless I am talking specifically about CPRA amendments. The CCPA and the CPRA give California consumers new rights to control their personal information and give businesses new responsibilities for the personal information of California consumers that they collect and process. The California laws update the previous notice and choice regime in several important ways. First, they place obligations on businesses to provide meaningful, actionable notice to consumers. The law requires businesses to provide specific and clear information to consumers about who is collecting their personal information, how long it is being kept, how it is being used, and to whom it is disclosed. The California Attorney General in 2020 promulgated regulations under the CCPA that provide businesses with even clearer requirements for notices. Second, the new law gives consumers important rights to understand and control the use of their personal information, rather than simply expecting consumers to choose another business if they don't like one business's data practices. Under the law, consumers can request access to their personal information held by businesses. On request, businesses must provide the categories and the specific pieces of information the business has about a consumer, the purposes for which information is being collected, shared, or used, and information about third-party businesses with whom the information is being shared. Consumers also have the right to have businesses delete their personal information, and under the CPRA, they will have the right to request the correction of inaccurate information. The law also gives consumers choices about how their personal information is collected and used. Consumers have the right at any time to opt out of the selling or sharing of their personal information. This includes, for example, the right to opt out of the use of personal information for cross-context behavioral advertising, which the CPRA specifically defines. Under the CPRA, consumers will also have the right to impose additional limits on the use of their sensitive personal information, which includes a wide range of especially sensitive information, ranging from, for example, login credentials, ranging to the content of certain communications, to information about a person's racial or ethnic background or religious beliefs, to health and biometric data, among other types of information. Businesses cannot retaliate or discriminate against consumers for exercising these rights, although they can offer certain limited financial incentives. Businesses also cannot use deceptive methods like dark patterns to persuade consumers. California's new law still, for the most part, creates an individual-focused regime. Consumers need to opt out, but the law makes it much easier for consumers to understand what the choice is and includes a number of requirements to make it practical to opt out. First, businesses must make the option to opt out easy to find and to exercise. For example, as a banner on a website with a button to click to make a choice. The Attorney General has specified regulations for this, including what the button must look like. Second, consumers can authorize agents to exercise their rights for them. The Attorney General has included global opt-outs, such as a setting on a browser, in the regulations, and the CPRA explicitly calls for regulations to create standards for opt-out preference signals that communicate consumers' rights. Overall, then, the California framework creates a meaningful, actionable set of notices and genuine choices for consumers. It also buttresses the individual choice framework in several ways. The CPRA adds purpose limitation and data minimization requirements. Under these requirements, businesses won't be able to collect more personal information than what is reasonably necessary and proportionate for the disclosed purposes for which it is being collected. And they won't be able to retain the personal information longer than is necessary to achieve those purposes. The CPRA also requires businesses to extend protections to their own service providers and contractors through contractual agreements. And businesses whose processing of consumer personal information poses significant risks to consumers' privacy or security must perform annual cybersecurity audits and regular risk assessments. Importantly, the new consumer rights are enforceable. The Attorney General is currently enforcing the CPRA. And one of the biggest innovations in the new law is the creation of a brand new agency, the California Privacy Protection Agency, which will begin administrative enforcement in a couple of years. I am the chair of the governing board for the new agency, which is the first agency with full administrative powers focused on privacy in the United States. The new agency will be creating regulations to give businesses clear rules and consumers clear protections, as well as enforcing the law and the regulations. Last, but certainly not least, I would like to say a word about harmonization and collaboration, an important theme of this forum. The CPRA and CCPA's protections apply to any California citizen, and their responsibilities apply to citizens that collect the data of California consumers, even if those businesses, are not in the state of California. In addition, California has learned from others in creating its new laws. The California laws draw from the General Data Protection Regulation and other models, and California's new laws, in turn, are already influencing the approach of other states in the US. In the materials for today, it is noted that Changi Province is developing a data sovereignty plan for its own citizens, but also that data protection depends on the cooperation of localities and countries around the world. Similarly, the CPRA specifically charges the California Privacy Protection Agency with, quote, cooperating with other agencies with jurisdiction over privacy laws and with data processing authorities in California, other states, territories, and countries to ensure the consistent application of privacy protections, end quote. It is important for localities to communicate and learn from one another in order to protect the privacy and individual rights of all of our citizens. So I'm especially grateful for the invitation to speak today and to learn from other localities around the world. We in California look forward to collaborating with others to protect the privacy of all our citizens. Again, thank you very much for the invitation to join this wonderful event, and I look forward to further discussion and collaboration. Congratulations on the forum from California.